Have you ever wondered why joy is so elusive after everything changes? Today, our guest Tamara talks about honest reflections on parenting through loss, resilience, and reclaiming purpose with her book that speaks to anyone striving for clarity and renewal as a parent. So stay tuned. Today, we have a special guest on the show here with us, Tamara Hill. She built a thriving corporate career before navigating profound personal and professional transitions. She chose to reimagine her life and founded the Hill House Group, where she designs art-curated vacation properties that blend storytelling with soulful aesthetics. She's now based in Italy, and she continues to create and inspire with her upcoming poetry memoir, The Threads of Becoming, offering a vulnerable lyrical exploration of resilience, growth, and transformation. So thank you so much, Tamara, for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your story and this book, if you wouldn't mind just telling us a little more about you.
Sure. The book came a lot from, I'd say, my early years, having some childhood neglect and a lot of grief and loss. I had a pretty full life of studying abroad and traveling solo, and then this fantastic career when the internet started in interactive and experience design. And like many, life throws some things your way that you don't expect. Divorce, raising kids on my own, and then as we all experienced the pandemic and going through that and becoming an empty nester really inspired the threads of becoming. So I think, the book is really to inspire people of the power of resilience and how you can rebuild a life and realize those dreams for myself that I visualized as a young child and have them all come to fruition. So it's a little bit how it all started.
I think that's so beautiful that you focus especially on resilience and maybe still, you didn't say it in so many words, but help me understand if I'm wrong here. Still doing what makes your soul sing regardless of that journey, whether it's as a single mom, whether it's before you even have children or if you have children. It sounds like that has been a focus for you like always or since having kids.
Always. I would say we use the term manifestation now, but I think maybe a superpower that I had when I was young going through hard times was visualization and imagining the life that I wanted and really being determined to turn that into reality. And then having a corporate career and just being younger in your late 20s or early 30s, it can get quite overwhelming with all the decisions and things you need to do and making sure you're sticking to your heart and your value system. And I'd say that is just one of the many gifts having children gave to me. As the moment my son was born, I thought, oh my gosh, I have my priorities straight. I have a focus. And it really helped simplify my life and helped me focus on what my priorities were. I think having my kids made that really big shift. And then you have the consciousness now of, oh my gosh, but I live in a society that I have to manage this corporate life and manage my children. And there comes with new challenges, right? When all of a sudden I'm very clear what I want, it might be more difficult to achieve those goals from a perception standpoint in corporate America.
Tamara, how do you balance that? And I'm going to give a personal example here. I mentioned it on the show before, but I've been flirting with a PhD for a long time. I love school. And just recently, my middle child, my 12-year-old daughter, has been sharing some struggles at school and wanting to do homeschooling. And at first I was like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to do my PhD again. But how do you balance those priorities and simplifying, but not at the expense of your own mental health and wellness, but also honoring that short stage with your kids potentially being home and creating space for them to thrive too? I know that's a loaded
Right.
question.
It's nuanced. It's a nuanced question, right? Because life isn't black and white. There's all the gray areas. It's being agile. For me, having a focus and a goal, trying to create as much of a schedule, but being agile and flexible with the way in which life works and being adaptable. I would say routine is helpful, but the realities of the world are difficult to stick to. And then communication, just always being really open and honest, whether it be with someone in your job or with your children, how you're trying to balance it. I would say I'm quite a faithful person in terms of not necessarily tied to a religion, just surrendering, breathing, knowing things will come when it's the right time and continuing to be determined. I had a really funny conversation with my children about this because, I've now shifted and I'm an entrepreneur doing a whole different thing. But when I was in corporate America and co-parenting with their dad, who was also a professional, the kids would almost act like I didn't work, right? They'd have this expectation. Of course you're doing this, mom, or you're picking this up, or you're this. And I said, do you guys forget, like, I have a pretty important job too? And they go, oh God, mom, you're right, but you're always around. You're always available. We forget you work. And I thought, okay, I'm doing a good job. Like I am not exposing them to that stress. And I think it's just, honestly, we have to have a level of consciousness throughout our entire day. I'm far from perfect. You slip, you mess up. But I think getting them to feel that overall is what's most important.
I really appreciate how you said that because the kids feel like a priority while you're still communicating that, hey, I've got these other things that are also important. You matter. You're my focus in a lot of ways.
Right.
And I have to do these other side things too. Great way to say it. I love how you talked about surrender, about being adaptable, about that resilience. Those are all things we love to talk about on the podcast. Can you share a little bit more though about resilience in your own personal stories, how you're better understanding that because of your own challenges or struggles?
Sure. I'd say it probably comes up in a couple of ways that are pretty steady in my life and I think are universal, grief being one of them. I had a lot of loss at a young age, and I was raised by my grandmother, who then passed when I was 20. And right as I was getting comfortable, I guess, with that, like of being able to I like to say I was a very high functioning, really sad person. I'd cry myself to sleep for a good year. My best friend growing up when we were 21, a year later, then died tragically in a car accident. And I made a decision right then and there that I was living on behalf of those 2 women, really understanding the value of just being able to wake up every morning and that we don't know when that will happen to any of us. It really solidified that I wanted to be a parent, raise my kids the way my grandmother raised me. And I'd say my best friend, I just felt like I gotta go after this life and get it for the both of us. And that's been pretty steady in my life, and one thing I really love that's going on today is there seems to be a lot of people trying to rally around grief, that it is a universal emotion, it is something that we're all going to go through, and making it more common to talk about, so that's been really helpful for me. And then I'd say in addition to that is those pressures as women to be able to do it all. And what was a blessing to me, because I ran digital design firms for my whole career, and then I went client side to Airbnb a couple of years before the pandemic. And then I also ended up being part of the pandemic layoffs. And I think that is real present day an example of resilience of how I ended up navigating that layoff, which was a couple of years before I knew I was going to become an empty nester. So there's already a lot kind of going on in my mind. And the decisions I took at that point in my career, I think really showed my resilience working in the making, living it fully to where other people really started seeing it. And of course, being vulnerable, writing poetry of a memoir.
I appreciate your examples. I love stories and how it came about. One really spoke to me. The listeners already know about it, but you talked about living on behalf of those 2 women, your grandmother and your best friend. My brother and my dad died unexpectedly and tragically, and obviously there's layers of grief there that I'm still working through. And the same
Right.
thing, like you start to live life a little bit differently, recognizing, okay, what do I do with this now? Like I stopped making so many excuses and recognize this is such a precious
Yeah.
life. We don't know how long it's going to be. And it sounds so trite when you say it out loud, but it really does make you lean in. And that's when I started podcasting. That's when I started to explore so many other things, schooling, all of these things more fully because I recognize just what a gift it is and stop letting fear rule my life. I think that's what it did for me. And it sounds like some level for you too.
It did. It really did. And I think it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. And one thing I always like to say is true love transcends death. I mean, for myself, I really find I can still have a relationship with these people that have gone before us, and it shows up in different forms. if you remain open to it. And this is 30 plus years ago, I had those two losses. And then it doesn't mean I was free from grief or future losses because 5 years ago, that pattern of very important people close together happened again. My father passed of Parkinson's. My other best girlfriend died of cancer, and I was part of her journey and with her on that process. And then my children at the same time lost a friend suddenly that they went to school with and their grandparents on their father's side. So it was also quite reflective to think, oh, my children are in their early 20s having these really intense losses close together like I did in my early 20s. And how can I help them through that journey? And where have I evolved? And how have I helped heal myself to help comfort them in these moments? And I do find honoring them in life, like my children can actually, it's almost as if they met my grandmother because I talk so much about her, keeping these people alive and remembering that you still can feel connected to them in
Absolutely.
whatever form that's right for you, right?
Yeah. Share with me where along this line, all of these experiences, you decided to write your memoir and how that came about.
Yes, it's interesting. Over the years professionally, you get to know people you've worked with for long periods of time. And so some clients, former clients, and things that you become friends with, they ended up knowing my life story, of how I grew up. And they would recognize, wow, you're a very resilient person. You have a powerful story of where you come from to what you built for yourself. And I was part of a women's organization that the CEO of that organization encouraged me to give a talk as resilience being the thread in the talk. And I denied it for 2 years. No, no. Everyone has a story. Mine isn't very important, all these things. And I stood on a stage, probably delivering a talk to 200 people and just seeing the response of the audience. Some felt very empowered, some were crying. And there was a publisher in the audience who suggested I write a memoir. And then I just couldn't finish the memoir in this linear form. It didn't feel true to me. Maybe I was a little scared and felt a little too vulnerable. And then I reached out to the publisher and said, I've always journaled that I write poetry. It just really feels right to me to tell my story in these vignettes, my experience in 9/11, grief, raising kids. And they said, go for it. That's how it all came about. And I'm really excited, particularly about the poetry, because the book you would think is marketed more towards women, but in my readings, I've been reading to a lot of couples or men, and particularly towards the end of the book, it really is more present day and post pandemic and pandemic, and it tends to be resonating universally. Just got a DM in my Instagram this morning saying, I was in tears as I finished your book yesterday. And other people really being open to talk about certain more painful topics. And I think poetry really does pull people together
Mhm.
because they can interpret it however it suits them. And then they tend to be vulnerable and share what's going on with them. It's really been connecting to the community for me.
Absolutely. I think poetry and music, art can do that in different ways. Do you mind sharing? I don't know if you can think of a certain experience as you've done these readings or shared your story through this book, parts that really stood out to people or that were really meaningful, or even the conversations with listeners, with readers. What resonated with them?
Yeah, there's been a grief is I am fine. It brings me a lot of joy that people will speak about grief. One woman asked me to sign the book over a poem called Whispering Goodbye, which was about holding my grandmother's hand through death and trying to help her on that journey. There's a poem called The Turning that is a topic I'm really passionate about because I don't think culturally we speak about how much we've all changed since the pandemic.
Mm.
And The Turning is about how we did all need to go inward and coming outward in a culture that has shifted. People are still in isolation and there is a loneliness pandemic. I can't even tell you how a very successful male lawyer walked up to me and said, I think about that every day. I'm fundamentally a different person, not just my business, but socially. Another mobile doctor who does a lot of work in Africa was talking to me about how it still impacts how he tries to go and make change around the world. Another thing that was quite big to my heart is I lived in New York during 9/11 and next to a firehouse, and I volunteer every year for firefighters. All my friends didn't come home. that morning truck. And I just got back 2 weeks ago from New York and had done a reading at the firehouse, and the fire chief of all of New York came. And it was just like, that's something that just has been very private to me that I live over every year and go work in these really private ways with firehouses, no matter where I was. So to expose that outward more and get more people in their community to see that love for that particular firehouse was really special.
Oh, it sounds
Yeah.
incredible. Everything that you're doing is very vulnerable, and you're talking about grief, you're talking about resilience, your personal stories, other people's grief. This is very raw and I imagine very rewarding.
It is. It can be, it's very funny. Like every year when I go to a firehouse, I get that elevated emotion when you almost get like anxiety 'cause it could create a reaction. Sometimes people cry. Sometimes it's just a very intense feeling. And sometimes it can feel overwhelming. But I think that's been the gift of writing this book is it recenters me, and it's become a lot less about my story and more about how people respond and feel safe and encouraged together. And that's been a really nice thing to experience for myself,
Yeah.
actually. Mhm.
So maybe you could help those listeners that are struggling to feel like the two things that you talk most about is resilience and grief. Maybe that really resonates with them. You could point to almost
Mm,
anybody in a crowd, and everybody's going through some level of grief or struggling to increase their resilience in the face of these challenges. What would you recommend for parents? I know listeners, there's a wide range of like young children to empty nesters to in the middle.
sure.
For those that are struggling to develop that resilience and feel fulfillment, feel joy, what would you recommend for them?
I wish I could remember who gave me this advice. My children were toddlers at the time, and it was at some social event. And someone had said, the best parental advice I can give you is to try to always remember how you felt at their age.
Mm,
You are obviously the parent, you are not their best friend. But if you can have that level of compassion and
mm,
parent from that point of view, they said it really served them. And I just never forgot that. And I really start there. That's just like the starting point. And then I think the key is honesty and safety that they can come to you with anything. And particularly in the world in which we live now, or with something like grief, if they've lost something, whether it be they feel they lost a parent through divorce, even though that parent is there, right? That
right.
they're grieving what the family used to be. And I think honesty and safety I found to be critical. And my son will be 24 shortly and my daughter 22. And they reflect that back to me. They reflect that I'm their safe space. They come to me when they're struggling. I remember hearing them talk when they were little. Remember, mom says there's a solution for everything. Remember this. And I think it's really important, and it can be a challenge as a parent sometimes. We feel we have to alter the truth to protect them. We feel maybe they're not ready to hear something. And those things are all potentially true, but we can still be honest and clear with them, and they're very age appropriate.
Yeah, so honesty and safety. Thanks for spending time with us today and hearing Tamara's story about finding stability and hope during life's big challenges. If you'd like ongoing support, practical resources, or more ways to feel energized at home or work, visit fulfillmenttherapy.org to sign up for one of our self-paced courses or to get helpful tips from our weekly email newsletters. We'll see you back here next with a new episode.